What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, April 26, 2017. Let me jiggle the little connector here. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open and working. The number is 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And we have a lot of stuff going on today. Today, the corporate media is finally starting to mention this Gotham Shield exercise. I got email from people, from the people who were living in the area saying that they hadn't heard anything. Now it's on their local media. Fox 5 in New York City just mentioned the exercise, which does make a lot of sense because otherwise you're going to have all kinds of people calling the police and swamping the 911 lines, wondering what's going on with all the military vehicles out there. So a lot of stuff going on. A lot of people are very nervous because of this tendency of these terror drills to turn into actual terror attacks, but so far nothing has gone bang. Now, yesterday, France came on out saying they have absolute proof that Assad used sarin gas in Idlib. And first of all, the big question is, why do they have samples when nobody's being allowed into the area? But France says they do. And their entire rationale is the sample of sarin that they have acquired supposedly from Idlib matches exactly the same sarin used in 2013, therefore we know it must be Assad. Actually, it's faulty logic because Assad didn't do the 2013 or the 2014 attacks. The UN chemical weapons inspectors said it was the rebels. The French are out there saying, well, we know it was Assad in 2013 and this is more of the same stuff, so it had to be him. And again, if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again seems to be the motto of all these governments and corporate media. And they're just trying to find something that's going to get traction and get the general public back on board the war wagon. But they're not having a lot of luck. In fact, I noticed a lot of people are saying this claim that Assad gassed his own people at Idlib does not make any sense. You know, he was winning. Their peace talks were going to allow him to stay in power. Why would he use chemical weapons against a militarily unimportant target? And so I actually saw an article came on out and said, well, really, it's Assad's way of terrorizing his own population to remind them what happens if they side with the rebels. And again, it's bogus thinking. None of the Syrian people are siding with the rebels. Most of them are from outside Syria. 95% of the Free Syria Army are not from Syria. They're hired mercenaries from elsewhere. So again, they're just throwing this stuff out, trying to get you to believe as you're supposed to believe here, because after all, this is the post-truth society, and reality and facts don't matter anymore. It's just what we can get you to believe and what you perceive as all that you need to decide on. Now, right now, apparently, Syria has accomplished complete military control over Palmyra, and apparently the U.S.-backed rebels have suffered serious damage. One of the real tragedies of this whole war in Syria is the destruction of some of these antiquities, like the Temple of Baal. It's just been absolutely torn to the ground, and just erasing that history. So it's a real tragedy. Okay, let's take our first phone call. Bob in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I would like to talk a little bit about the Constitution.
Okay.
This has been bothering me for a while. In our high schools and our universities, they have classes called American History. And those classes have a textbook, and in the back of the textbook there's a printed Constitution. My question is this printed Constitution, word for word, letter for letter, the same as the Constitution put together in the 1780s?
Well, without looking at the actual textbook, I can't tell you, but one area that we know there's a difference, there was, before the present 13th Amendment, there was another 13th Amendment, the Foreign Emoluments Clause, I think it was called, and we know that there's been some revisions to the Constitution here and there over the years. But the only way to know for sure is to go to the National Archives website, where you can actually see a scan of the original handwritten Constitution, or the official printed release of the Constitution that was issued at the time, and you can then compare it to what's in the back of the textbook. I do know, I've heard from a lot of parents and educators that what is in the Common Core curriculum for American history is drastically changed from what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights actually says. I don't even know if they have the Constitution and Bill of Rights in these textbooks. Out of concern, somebody might go and check for themselves. But there's definitely, obviously, an effort by the federal government to render the Constitution and the Bill of Rights null and void or impotent. George Bush was always talking about it being a blankety-blank piece of paper, and we certainly know that NSA, FBI, CIA have absolutely no respect for the Fourth Amendment, or the Fifth Amendment, or the Ninth Amendment, or the Tenth Amendment. And now, of course, we're seeing this intense attack on freedom of speech. The corporate media screaming that we're all fake news out here. Everybody's getting angry when we start telling the truth in an age that's supposed to be controlled by lies. So it's really worth it to check for yourself. And by the way, you should all read the Constitution yourself. That is the original contract with America, and you should read it and know it, so that you can have an educated opinion when somebody comes up and says, well, the Constitution says this and the Constitution says that. And there are pocket versions of it available. I have one right here. This was actually being given out by InfoWars, and it has the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, jury rights, and these are really very useful to have, very compact, very portable. They're from Free Speech Systems, LLC in Austin, Texas, and you can get reprints of these at Infowars.com. It's well worth having.
Okay, well, thanks, Mike.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news here, we are getting more reports from the Russian forces that ISIS formations near Hama and Homs have been totally decimated, totally defeated. So Syria and Russia have regained the initiative inside Syria, despite Donald Trump's cruise missile attack, which was really quite ineffectual in the military sense. Now, of course, we're getting this word that Turkey is starting to wade on in. And even some questions about whether Israel, which has already been bombing Syria, if they might actually actively get more involved there. Because that whole Syria agenda is on the verge of collapse. It was just before that Idlib gas attack. The whole Syria agenda was just on the verge of being a write-off. And wow, how lucky for the anti-Assad people that Assad went out and supposedly gassed his own people at Idlib. But again, the story never made sense. He had no motive to do it. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose. The gas attack helped the United States war machine. It helped the rebels. It gave the corporate media something to demonize him with. And, of course, the corporate media right now, they're demonizing everybody around the globe. And I keep getting all these emails about, oh, this Kim Jong-un, these crazy things he's saying. So, well, we're not sure he's saying them. Because everything we think we know about North Korea and Kim Jong-un was given to us by the same people who told us Saddam had nuclear weapons. And we know that when Ahmadinejad was running Iran, they deliberately misquoted him. In a presentation, he was saying that Israel will eventually vanish from the pages of history, which is a very passive comment. And it was mistranslated into Iran will wipe Israel off the face of the earth, which put a whole different context. And it was a deliberate misquote to make Ahmadinejad look bad. And we can assume that the same thing is being done to make Kim Jong-un look crazy, look evil. And it's amazing, in what is supposed to be a politically correct, tolerant society, the personal attacks on the basis of his weight and his hair, it's degenerated down to name calling. Now then, interestingly enough, getting back to that issue about what Israel is going to do, Netanyahu has come on out and said that the Golan Heights belongs to Israel, and Israel is going to stay there until the rest of the world accepts that the Golan Heights and all that oil and gas underneath it belongs to Israel, not Syria. So That's Israel's idea of peace in the Middle East. They want this piece of the Middle East, and they want that piece of the Middle East, and they want that piece of the Middle East over there here. Cautionary article coming out of Activist Post. Trump's aggressions in Syria will have long-term consequences. And all of these interventions have long-term consequences. But nobody ever thinks in the long term. There's always the immediate gain. And I'll give you a good example. The overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in 1953 and the imposition of the Shah. And it got oil, petroleum, raw petroleum, to American and British oil companies at lowered prices, which is what they wanted, but it ultimately led to the 1979 revolution and the hostility with Iran ever since. The same thing with Cuba. The U.S. went on in and installed Batista as a dictator over Cuba so that PepsiCo and United Fruit could get agricultural products from Cuba at below market prices to maximize their profits. That in turn led to the Castro Revolution. Same thing in Chile, same thing in all these interventions. There's always a short-term economic advantage to be had, and then they all of a sudden realize in the long term, there's going to be a backlash. And it always, always happens. And the way our foreign policy is being conducted now, they're clearly not thinking in the long term. By the way, they've changed the agenda in Syria yet again. We're back to the idea of safe zones. We've been down this sometimes I think they've got one of those spinning wheels the gamblers use. You know, you just spin it and it goes. What are we going to say about Syria today? Assad is a tyrant. We need a humanitarian intervention. He's gassing his own people. He's got weapons of mass destruction. And we're not actually after Assad. We're after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Then we're back after Assad. He's gassing his people again. And now we're going to have the plan for the safe zones to carve Syria up into little tiny pieces. And it almost makes me want to call up the White House and say, let's call off all the war in Syria until you actually decide what it is you're trying to accomplish over there. And, of course, we know what they're trying to accomplish over there. They can't admit it to the American people. They want Assad out. They want a puppet ruler in. Most Americans are not going to sacrifice their children for something like that. So, Turkey has just started airstrikes into northeast Syria. That's definitely away from some of the other war zones and back into that whole Kurdistan area. Now, the U.S. State Department is saying that Turkey cannot fight the Kurdistan People's Party at the expense of the anti-ISIS fight. And what the State Department is trying to do is to get Turkey to go easy on the Kurds because the Kurds are helping the U.S. against Assad. And that's always the problems with a three-party war. When you have a war where there's two sides that know who they are, the British and the colonials, things are easy to understand. When you have Turkey in there with their particular agenda, and you have the U.S. in there with their agenda, and you have Syria with their agenda, we have Turkey who's like helping on one side and harming on the other. And we're even seeing that with the United States, that are actually fighting against ISIS and Al-Qaeda over in the Kurdish areas, at the same time helping ISIS and Al-Qaeda against Assad up there in the north. Meanwhile, things are not getting any better over in Yemen. Article coming out of the independent Great Britain, the war is tearing apart the ancient country's social fabric. There are more than 10,000 dead, 19 million people in desperate need of basic humanitarian aid, including 7.3 million on the brink of famine because of the Saudi blockade of the harbors. The figures in Saudi Arabia's 2-year-old war are staggering. Now, interestingly enough, the Independent is saying it's a civil war. No, it isn't. The U.S. intervened, kicked out Yemen's elected government, imposed puppet rulers. The people of Yemen didn't want a puppet ruler. They're trying to kick the puppet rulers out. And the U.S. has sent Saudi Arabia in to slap them around and say, yes, you will accept your puppet rulers. That's what's really going on over in Yemen. It's not really a civil war. Most accurately, it's a counter-coup d'etat. All right, let's grab another phone call. Wes in Idaho, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Do you know the difference between a milk cow and the Holocaust?
Oh, come on. I don't want to do Holocaust jokes on the show. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so what's on your mind? What's on your mind?
I met Michael Hoffman in a health food store in Coeur d'Alene yesterday, the famous author, I'm speaking about there?
Yes.
And, we got to talking about things, and one of the things we got to talking about what was in my grocery basket. I mentioned that there's a 117-year-old woman in Italy, and she said that she ate very little vegetables and fruits her whole life. And I wanted to get that across to you earlier. I brought up a couple of months ago, Vladimir Stephenson. It's on the internet. He was the Arctic explorer. He's on the 22-cent postal stamp, which is, we've got to be recognized. Hey, that's even better better than being on the front page of Newsweek or Time or Life. You're on a postage stamp. But anyway, his diet, he went out to the Arctic and he ate like an Eskimo, which meant caribou and fish. And he came back to the USA, and they figured he was going to be have scurvy and have plugged arteries from all the saturated fat. But upon testing his health, they found him in fine health. In fact, about 15 years later, they put him in an observed study in which he was fed nothing but meat for a year at Bellevue Hospital in New York. One of the men that... Okay,
Wes, if I could interrupt here because we're almost on a commercial break here. The 117-year-old woman has just passed away, but 117, you can't really sneeze at that situation. And, her advice was that, she ate meat, didn't really do a lot of vegetables or fruits, and basically ignored doctor's advice. And what you need to understand is that a lot of the dietary advice that we are given in this country is less about health and more about available supplies and sources and maximizing profitability. One of the big reasons for the push toward vegetarianism is that you can feed people for a lot less money. It costs less to just have vegetables and get them to the store as opposed to dealing with the meat animals. They're a lot more trouble and it's a lot more costly. And it's mostly being driven by the economics than by the actual health concerns. But they can't say, we want you to eat this instead of that because we want to make more money. So they'll come up with some kind of a ginned-up study that says, oh, this is bad for you, and you should be eating more of this. And it's amazing when you read the commodities reports and you see where there's a surplus and where there's a shortage, you can almost predict the health advice that you're going to be getting in the coming months to steer you toward the ample supply of something that can be sold at a reasonable profit. But it may not be absolutely what's best for you because the concern really is the economics of the food supply chain.
Fertility is another dynamic involved. They've known that people on a vegetarian diet have less fertility. It's been known for years. Put them on the Coliseum, bread and entertainment. Is that what they go for? Pizza. The dynamic involved with grains is that it boosts up your glucose rate.
Okay,
even more than sugar.
Wes, we're going to have to let you go. I'm sorry, we've hit the commercial break here, and thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as if the world didn't have enough potential flashpoints for Armageddon, apparently the Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama is threatening war if Kosovo is denied entry into the European Union. And apparently, Prime Minister Rama said Europe would face a nightmare if the Balkans go crazy because EU accession is off the agenda, with the region becoming a gray zone in which other actors have more influence than the European Union. In other words, he's hinting a pivot toward Russia. It just is getting crazy. All right, another phone call. Bill in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. How you doing today?
Doing all right.
Okay. I've fallen off the Trump bandwagon a while back, and I'm not sorry that I'm off of it. Okay, we had Jeff Sessions coming out saying that we've got to prosecute criminally WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. We've had John Huntsman, a never-Trumper from Utah, being appointed ambassador to Russia. Mm-hmm. And then we had Ivanka Trump. I saw her on the news yesterday, seated with Angela Merkel and Christine Lagarde. Okay, and today she was quoted as saying we must accept these refugees into the country. What the heck is going on?
Well, the American people voted for a new direction for the country, and I'm afraid what we bought is just an empty wrapper. And I can imagine a lot of people are just as frustrated about that as I am. We're not getting the change in direction we voted for. We've been cheated. And I'm no longer supportive of Trump. I still think it would have been worse or situation accelerating more rapidly with Hillary there. But to say that I'm disappointed in Donald Trump would be an understatement. And interestingly enough, we had that one guy calling yesterday saying, well, Trump's doing great. At least he's doing the immigration thing. He's getting the wall. Well, it looks like Trump's going to cave on the wall as well. So we're not getting the government we voted for. We have been shortchanged. And again, it's a repeating pattern. And it shows us that whoever's in the Oval Office isn't really the power in this country. All of the evils that we're seeing before us, it is systemic. It is within that deep state. It's within that network of ultra-rich, ultra-powerful people, the untouchables. And I'm disappointed in Trump. I was hoping you'd have at least a little more spine.
Meeting here with the 100 senators at the White House.
I think we're going to be at war with North Korea by the weekend because, they're out there saying North Korea is going to attack Australia. Now, all of a sudden, they've decided the Taipei 3 can actually reach the continental United States. They're really ramping it up. They're laying it on with the Bex howitzer to try and get everybody all hot and bothered for the next war.
Yeah. Sad.
It's tragic. It's more than sad. It's dangerous. And again, I don't think they can keep this under control. If you look at how badly managed the wars to date have been, they're not going to be able to keep this under control. At some point, you're going to see the rest of the world that is not already controlled by the United States. They're going to pull together and say, we draw the line here. We don't want a one-world government, certainly not one that treats its own population as badly as the U.S. government treats us.
Okay. Well, keep up the good work, Mike.
Just as long as I can.
All right. Yeah, likewise.
All right. Well,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much here. All right. I'm going to hold off on the next call until after this coming commercial break. And apparently Netanyahu has put a real hammer into German-Israeli relations because the day after Holocaust Remembrance Day, Netanyahu canceled a meeting with visiting German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel because he wanted to meet with the NGO Breaking the Silence, which is talking about Israel's humanitarian crimes against the Palestinians. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phones here, story just now coming out from TASS. Basically, North Korea's mission at the United Nations is saying North Korea neither fears war nor wants to avoid it. And remember yesterday I made the observation that when the U.S. was developing its nuclear arsenal, Even after successfully bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the U.S. continued testing, therefore that we should not construe North Korea's testing of nuclear weapons as precluding that they don't already have something deployable. And so getting back to this TASS article, one line in there is really raising the hairs on the back of my neck. The mission reminded that North Korea, quote, had access to a powerful nuclear deterrent to protect itself from the U.S. nuclear threat, end quote. In other words, they're implying that, yes, North Korea already has a fieldable nuclear weapon. And I don't like all the chest thumping, but it's going to spin out of control. It is absolutely going to spin out of control. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Brendan in San Francisco, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was listening to Lee Stranahan, and as you know, he was with Breitbart for 7 years, and he's kind of out now. I think he's with Sputnik. He's got a show starting up. But he basically was saying, we have to get Ivanka Trump out of the White House. This is the #1 priority. Now, he's saying it's time to hit the streets. We can't wait. We have to get Ivanka out. And then kind of in the same vein, there was an economist suggesting that what Trump is doing with Korea is distinguishing his administration from Obama's by putting Korea on the front burner and setting a tone that we're not going to play games for the next 4 years through his administration. He's going to treat them with a hard hand and then back off a bit and maybe send them a boatload of rice or something of that nature. But as far as I can tell, this is a lot of kabuki theater based on a photograph I've seen with Jenna Bush sitting with Huma Abedin and Ariana Huffington. I mean, these people are supposedly diametrically opposed, and yet they're sitting here having a brunch-in. It just seems like kabuki theater now.
Well, there's a lot of theater going on, and a lot of celebrities dream of being politicians, and some politicians have actually become actors, like Fred Thompson. So there is a lot of overlap in that area. As far as Ivanka, again, the concern is not so much Ivanka herself, but her husband and his alliances. Frankly, Donald Trump has allowed his entire White House to be hijacked by the neocons. And again, we, the American people, we voted for a significant change of direction in this country, and all we got was an empty wrapper. And again, we saw that in past elections. But I'm very alarmed at the recklessness with which the foreign policy is being handled right now, where everybody is just out there with groupthink, magical thinking. If we act tough enough, they'll back down. And at some point, somebody's going to push back. Even if they're overshadowed and outnumbered, they're going to be desperate enough to just try and strike back. And somebody might just get lucky. And it was rather interesting. Somebody put up an article about what can happen to large armadas and how the loss of them can actually destroy the myth of a nation's invincibility. And they were talking about another incident that occurred in that part of the world involving a naval encounter that ended badly for the superior force. And, of course, we all remember the ignoble ending of the Spanish Armada. And if this is hypothetical, if North Korea were able to go on out and sink the Carl Vinson, the damage would not just be to the Carl Vinson and, sadly, its crew, or even the auxiliary ships. It really would change the world's opinion of just how actually effective the U.S. military might be. Now, right now,
perception is everything.
Yeah, perception is everything. The U.S. has a good track record going up against countries that have no real military with which to fight back. But we have yet to see what our current military is going to do against a peer adversary. And from what we keep hearing about the failure of our weapon systems, I don't think it's all that good. And again, the carrier groups themselves are a very visual display of power projection, but naval experts consider them archaic, a holdover from World War II, and very vulnerable to the latest generation of anti-ship weapons that are being developed specifically to go after the carriers and can be deployed from the new generation of stealth submarines, which the U.S. is having a very, very hard time being able to detect.
I think if you want to destroy the West, they're playing their hand perfectly, meaning I don't like the term the deep state. I'm just going to say the Zionist bankers that want to destroy the West. They've got us spread so far thin, and now they're going to start throwing billions of dollars are being proposed to be spent in Afghanistan. Are you kidding me? What, are they going to move some more rocks around? This is the downfall of the United States, and we're watching it. I think it's time to hit the streets, Mike. We got to get with the left and just freaking get in front of Trump's face and say, we are not taking this. I mean, it's time.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's time for the American people to start screaming bloody murder about the direction this nation is on, because this isn't abstract anymore. We're talking about actually getting into a world war that we are going to lose, and I do not want to see that happen. Certainly, the fact that we can't control Afghanistan. I'm sure that Putin is laughing his head off because the U.S. is being harmed by Afghanistan to the same extent the former Soviet Union was. Historians look at the Soviets' defeat in Afghanistan as ending the Soviet myth of invincibility, and that in turn led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. And we're seeing the same thing playing out in reverse now. Okay?
Yeah, Mike, I'm telling you, I've been very discouraged, and I'm ready to hit the streets. We have to get with the left and just make this thing untenable. We can't sit back anymore. I love your show, but I'm ready to get on the streets and just block traffic or whatever these tactics are that just stop this machine from rolling forward. These damn bankers, they're satanic devils, and they are going to, carve our hearts out. It's so insane now. I can't take it anymore. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot there, and we're going to switch over to Billy in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Billy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Aloha, buddy.
Aloha. Nui nui.
I was trying to get you to smile, man. That's so weird, the caller that just called, because I had a comment to make, being a long-time listener of your show. I watch you and Alex Jones a lot. I don't watch Alex that much anymore, but I watched you a lot. And I kind of came up with this. I mean, I'm not as smart as you, don't pretend to be, but great admirer of you and your show. But after analyzing everything in the broad perspective, I came up with a solution, but I don't see it happen in our lifetime. The four horsemen of the New World Order, shadow government, what do they call it, the deep state now or something?
Yes.
Is the Trilateral Commission, the Council of Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Community Group, whatever you want to call them, and the private central banks. There's your four horsemen. There's your shadow government. And when the day finally comes, when black people, white people, Hispanic, Orientals all stop hating each other and stop looking at each other like you're the enemy, I can't stand you, whatever, middle class, lower class, when all Americans stop looking at each other with this divide and conquer thing that they have developed against us, right wing, left wing, when everybody cuts it out and just says, man, we are being steamrolled here. They have to get together. Millions of people have to get into the streets and put a stop to this. And then when that happens, maybe, just maybe, because we're not going to have it happen in our own government. I just don't see it ever happening. When Russia, China, Japan, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all these countries that have seen and have proof of what we have done in the past and are still doing now, not only to our own people, but as far as our past goes with our invading other countries, Libya, assassinating dictators and replacing them, overthrowing, destabilizing with this George Soros crap and everything. Maybe they can hold the United States and George Soros accountable for crimes against humanity. Because it's going to get to the point to where, like you said, brother, they're going to start pressing buttons and then it's not going to matter anymore. It's going to be so bad. It's going to be too late, man. It's time that people get in the streets and just, you know, even if it just says, wake up America, something. People have to get together and stop all this divide and conquer stuff. We have to get together and put a stop to these vampires.
Yeah, we absolutely do, and that's why when I was talking about the blueprint for the new America, rule number 1 is going to be no more private central banks, because they are a system of enslavement and looting and plundering. The private central banks do not serve the nation. They do not serve the people of the nation. They serve themselves, and they succeed because the rulers of nations are very easy to corrupt. As Aaron Russo used to say, your average politician would sell their own mother for $1. And it's absolutely
right. There's a guy up in Canada who's a politician. There's a guy in Canada, a politician up in Canada, and he wrote a book called Money Mafia.
Yes,
and it pretty much. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, and he maps everything out. He actually was inside the government and knows the inside scoop. Same things that you and I are aware of, and you're much more knowledgeable than I'll ever be, but I'm just saying that it's to the point to where, you know, your everyday common Joe who listens to the right side of the media now is aware of how terrible these organizations are. And it all comes down to those 4 entities: Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg, and the private central banks. They're all tied in together for the globalist agenda. And they want us to be their slaves, not just the interest slaves, but a lot worse than that, man.
I think there are more.
People have to stop the hate.
I think you do. That we've got to stop falling for this divide and conquer nonsense. But I think there are more players than just the 4. I mean, it's nice to try and fit them into the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. But I mean, you've got ultra-rich people, as you mentioned, George Soros, Sheldon Adelson, even Bill Gates, who seem to feel being that rich gives them a right to play with the planet and its people like personal toys. There are a lot of players, and it's basically this ad hoc network of the ultra-rich, ultra-powerful who have just bought their way or blackmailed their way to control of all of these various governments. And again, the speed with which Donald Trump got brought to heel gives us an idea of just how powerful these things are. Anyway, listen, Billy, phone lines are loading up here.
Can I say one more thing?
One more thing.
I really hate to say it because I was a long-time supporter of Trump, but when he started out with firing General Flynn, and now, you know, with Bannon, and now this stuff his daughter's putting out about letting all these Syrian immigrants in, the Trojan horse that Trump warned us about might be what Mitt Romney said. He's a con man. He might have conned us the whole time, man. I'm sorry to say it, but I'm starting to feel like I got conned. You know, God bless you, Mike. Have a good one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Peter, thank you for waiting so patiently. What is on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I just wanted to, again, point out where all these places coincide, and start out by saying that the 100th of 1% that run the world, and what are the numbers where, you know, like the top 60 or 200 families or whatever it is have control the wealth of 2/3 of the world or something.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty amazing.
It's the banks. The banks is where it all flows from. The banks own the corporations. The banks finance the corporations. The banks certainly own the government. The banks own the media. Look who our foreign policy. Look who the banks are. Look who the people Soros and Adelson and Haim Saban, and look who all these people are. Look who they are. and now we have Ivanka Trump and this Kushner guy who seems to be the tumor, the malignant tumor inside this administration, if there's a point to any one, but it all comes down to one. All these things, the federal government, the banks, federal government, the media, the military, they all, they all come down because, for instance, like our foreign policy is basically dictated by Israel or somebody who's got their interests, but they all are agents, they're the operations. They carry out the will of the banks, and look who the banks are.
Yes.
So everything's there just to carry out the will. So you can talk about all these different power centers, military, industrial, climate, deep space, state, and all that stuff. They all are there as organs, just organs, to be operated and manipulated by the banks, and you know who they are.
Well, the scary part of it is that the global financial system is starting to appear to almost be operating outside human control. I mean, these owners of the banks and everything, they'll sit at the top and then they'll imagine they're still calling the shots, but so much of it is now automated. I think it's spinning out of control and becoming naturally unstable, and sooner or later it is going to result in somebody crossing that line and turning that key. Anyway, Peter, we got to let you go.
Can I make one more thing? Okay.
Stay on the line. Stay on the line. I'll come right back to you after this commercial break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Peter, you wanted to finish up with one more idea.
Yeah, and that's this, Mike. That the private central bankers, and we all know who they are. I mean, let's be real. We know who they are, but they can inflate any bubble and make money up on the inflating of the bubble, and deflate it because they know it's coming, and make money on the way down. They can do a press run and print in 5 seconds. They can print enough money to pay off any politician or newspaper person or media personality in the world. Not that they're not already owned anyways, and they're totally unaudited. And then you have you wonder why foreign policy is the way it is. Well, we've been sharing all these intercepts, everything that the CIA and the DIA and the NSA, all these surveillance intercepts in raw data goes to Israel. So how do we have a foreign policy that keeps us out of war and serves our interests? How do we have a democracy with an institution like the Federal Reserve? How does it possibly coexist? How can you have a country with those two things going on?
Well, you really can't. And, the Federal Reserve is a supreme authority, if not the supreme authority. We even have a video of Alan Greenspan admitting the Federal Reserve answers to no federal government agency. They are a law unto themselves. And you're right. They will manipulate the economy to their own benefit. And a little bit of a history of the Federal Reserve. It was a really sweet deal. Do you know the Federal Reserve does not pay any taxes on all the money they're making from the American people? It's right in the charter for the Federal Reserve. The only taxes they pay are the property taxes on the ground underneath their various bank buildings. And that's it. They don't pay any other taxes. And when the Federal Reserve was proposed, it was supposed to be this bank that anybody could invest in and own a part of, but as soon as the charter was signed, the plotters behind the Federal Reserve simply created enough money to loan to themselves to buy all the shares of the Federal Reserve. And it was another little bit of a scam that they did. And you're right, this constant cycle of inflation and deflation, it's a giant heartbeat that pumps the real assets of the people to the pockets of the bankers. And they've been playing this scam on the human race for 300 years, and they get away with it because politicians are just as greedy as the bankers are.
And Mike, when you take all that into consideration, it's laughable. It's a joke to even consider the United States of America as its own country.
Yeah.
Really is.
Okay. Well, listen, Peter, we're going to let you go, and I've got 2 more phone calls, then we're going to close the lines here, but I'm going to hold till after our station break. Meanwhile, some very alarming stories coming on out. The USS Carl Vinson Carrier is now within striking range of North Korea. And now we have this article from Zero Hedge where Tillerson, Mattis, and Coates are calling North Korea urgent national security threat, and we must be prepared to act. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to Kenny in Pennsylvania. Kenny, thank you for waiting so patiently. What is on your mind today?
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, okay. I got a little legal thing for you here. I'll change the subject a little bit. Without prejudice, when you sign your name without prejudice, there's a number behind it that you have to put. Do you know what that number is, 108 or 1038, whatever it was?
Well, first of all, I'm not a lawyer, and I have absolutely no idea. Sorry.
No kidding. Oh, okay. All righty. Well, I thought you might know. Okay. I'll have to call John Statmeyer. I think I heard it on his show.
Okay, well, his show follows mine, and you can call him on in and get a clarification.
Okay. Do you remember Peter Neese? It was on his show. Do you remember Peter Neese? Or do you don't listen to his show?
Sorry, John. I don't always listen to your show because I have other things I'm trying to do.
Okay. All right. All right. Thanks anyway.
All right. Thanks. We're going to switch to Janet in South Florida. Janet's going to be our last call for a while because I got to get caught up on the news here. Janet, thank you for waiting. What is on your mind?
Thanks for bringing me in. Very quickly, I have 2 items. The last one I'd like you to elaborate on, and I'll hang up. But the first one, to all the great people calling in with all the great things they're talking about, I'm in the same position. I voted for Trump, and the last 3 weeks, I'm not only saddened, I'm full of rage. One of the reasons is I have 2 adult sons, and they struggle and have been struggling for work and income. And I'm thankful to the young man that called in and said he'd like to know how we can organize because I know there are plenty of us. I just want to throw out my very small idea, and maybe other people then in the days to come can call in if they have a better idea. One thing that I do, and I don't know how far it goes, the hotline to the White House, and these people that sit there, they're volunteers and they take comments and they're turned over to the president to read. And that number, that hotline number is simply 1-202-456-1111. And I do it more than once a day. I've done it twice, 3 times a day when I have the time because I'm retired. The other comment, please, Mike, you mentioned Ivanka Trump and you had someone call in. I missed, because, sometimes we miss things in politics because our stomach can't handle anything more. Ivanka Trump met with Angela Merkel and the other one with the, I know who she is, I forget her name. Can you just elaborate? What is this about bringing in the refugees? Because Trump also conceded to Australia by us taking in those Syrian refugees that are on that island. Now we're going to take those in. What is it, 10,000 of them? Mm-hmm. And what is Ivanka Trump doing? I didn't vote for her or her husband, and I call in every day and tell that to the president. I don't want them. I didn't vote for them. That's one of the things that's being done wrong to us. We need good ideas from you and other guys like you on the radio to tell us how we can organize, how we can go after the White House and say, no, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We're not going to take it. Can you elaborate on Ivanka Trump meeting with Merkel about bringing more refugees in? And I'll just hang up. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Obviously, a lot of people are very concerned about Ivanka's comment, again, contrasting with Donald Trump's campaign statements about securing our borders. And we certainly know that the reason all of these refugees are being shoved all over the globe is it's part of the New World Order's psychological assault on humanity. It's an attack on our identity. Take away your history, take away your culture, take away any regional identity, because if you don't have a strong sense of self, you are easier to control and push around. And it's kind of eerie looking at what's going on. I keep thinking back to George Lucas' very first movie, THX 1138, where it was just all these people just blended together and nobody had any sense of who they were other than this is where they go to work, this is where they go to shop, and they go home, and that's it. And that's really where we're heading. And Lucas was very prescient when he made that. He originally made it as a student film. Then he got the money to produce it as an actual feature. And but again, it's all part of trying to make us forget who we are or have any loyalty to our immediate community, our immediate region. We're seeing it already down in New Orleans. They're starting to take down all the Confederate monuments. They're literally having to protect the work crews with snipers. That's how angry the people are. And this moving of the refugees all over, it's a deliberate attempt to blur us, to blur our identity. So we're not really sure who we are. Not even sure what language we should be using, not even sure what restroom to be using. It's all an assault on our sense of self. And we have to basically make an effort to remember who we are. And when Bill Nye comes on out and says gender is a spectrum, no, I'm sorry, I'm a guy. I've always been a guy. I've never been anything other than a guy. So it is very shocking. It's another area in which we are not getting. We, the American people, voted for specific changes to our national policy. We're not getting them. We got ourselves an empty wrapper. And whether Trump was conning us all along or whether he has been co-opted by the New World Order deep state, to me, it's irrelevant at this point. We have to deal with the after effects of it all. All righty, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just rejoining our network. I want to step on back to this story about Tillerson, Matisse, Coates are calling North Korea an urgent national security threat, and they are prepared to act. Now, North Korea, if we were not over there rattling our sabers, would not be a threat to the United States of America, even if it has nuclear weapons and the Taepodong 3 missile to get them over here. North Korea wants a nuclear deterrent. Even their UN mission describes it as a deterrent. That they are building these weapons so that other nations will leave them alone. Because they remember the last time the United States invaded their country and they don't want to go through that again. And I've mentioned this in connection with Saddam's nuclear weapons, which he didn't have, and Iran's nuclear weapons, which they are not building, and North Korea's nuclear weapons, we're not exactly sure what they've got. Nations are trying to get these weapons to deter an invasion from outside. And it is worth remembering and repeating that with all the rhetoric about Saddam's nuclear weapons and Iran's nuclear weapons and North Korea's nuclear weapons, there's only one nation on Earth that's ever actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction on the civilians of another country. And that's the United States. And it was done to prove that we had the weapons and were psychotic enough to actually use them. So North Korea is not an urgent national security threat if we just leave them alone. Now they're talking about banning them from their own fishing grounds as punishment for the missile tests. Those people are starving already. Might want to think that Kim Jong-un might welcome a war because it's going to thin out his population. They got too many of them up there. Now, I have commented on numerous occasions that Netanyahu does not have the support of much of the Israeli people or even of the military. And that is underscored by this article that came out from Awsat.com, the English version. Apparently, 7,000 soldiers desert the Israeli army every single year. And many of them fake illnesses and say, we've got to get on out. But they're trying to get out of the service because they realize what they're being asked to do in places like the West Bank and Gaza isn't moral, isn't just, and they're fed up with it. And that's going to be an eroding factor on any army that does not believe in the moral rightness of the battle into which they are sent. And that is going to affect the U.S. military power projection. That's why they're trying to do everything with robots and missiles and drones now. And even with the drones, they have a real problem with pilot retention. Those pilots are sitting in those trailers. It looks like a glorified video arcade, but they realize real people are being killed on the other end. And they're having a real hard time dealing with it. Now, speaking of Iran, article coming on out of the Real News. The U.S. is threatening the nuclear deal it admits Iran is in compliance with. And the question is, how will Tehran respond? The Trump administration has conceded Iran has kept all of its commitments under the P5+1 deal. They're trying to make an argument that Iran isn't complying with the spirit of the agreement, which is a very vague, poorly defined term. I guess they were expecting Iran to be smiling and grinning while all this was going down. But they acknowledge Tehran is fulfilling all of its obligations in that deal. It's the United States that is still refusing to lift the sanctions. And now Trump is saying, well, it's time for a renegotiation, or it's time to cancel that. Now, here's where that gets to be a problem. If the U.S. goes back on the deal with Iran, every other nation on earth will realize that trying to make any deal with the U.S. is pointless, and that will include North Korea. Okay. So, article coming on out of Global Research, Trump talks tough on North Korea. He certainly has been. It's very obvious. They actually did stumble in Syria because nobody bought the gas attack in Idlib. They're still going through the due diligence to act like it's the truth and we should never question it, but we're all questioning it. And so now they're shifting the focus to North Korea. And again, please keep in mind that everything you think you know about North Korea and Kim Jong-un is coming from the same people who told you Saddam had nuclear weapons and Iran was building nuclear weapons, that there were torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. Trust us, the Lusitania wasn't smuggling weapons to Great Britain, and on and on and on and on. So, this afternoon, Trump is holding a briefing for all 100 senators on North Korea at the White House. Tomorrow, supposedly, they're going to brief the House of Representatives. And maybe Trump is lobbying for an actual congressional declaration of war to make it official. And even as we have Nikki Haley screaming about North Korea shouldn't be testing intercontinental ballistic missiles, what does the U.S. do? They fire off one. They fired off a Minuteman III missile from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California to just show North Korea that, yes, our rockets really do work and we mean business. It is openly belligerent. They're trying to escalate the situation. They are so desperate for a real war because they think a real war is going to make all of you forget about the crime and corruption and oppression that you have been dealing with in this country, that you will throw a snappy salute at the flag and fling your money and your babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets. Because, hey, that's what worked before. Alrighty. Now then, we're talking about the Armada. The U.S. Naval Armada menacing North Korea, and they're confirming that the USS Michigan is joining the Armada. It's at the moment in the South Korean port of Busan, and then will move to join the Armada. Now, the USS Michigan is designated an SSGN, and it is one of 4 Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines that were taken off nuclear duty because of treaty limits on nuclear weapons. And rather than scrap these 4 subs, 22 of the 24 missile tubes were refit with vertical launch tubes. And so the other 2 tubes were converted to lockout chambers for divers and intelligence work and so forth. But the USS Michigan all by itself can launch 150 Tomahawk cruise missiles from a range of 1,500 kilometers. It is heavy, heavy firepower. Now, as you know, the THAAD missile system is being deployed in South Korea. They're saying it will be operational at any moment. And this is actually one of the issues that is alienating China. China is very concerned about the THAAD being anywhere near their territory. And we're getting mixed signals from China about what's going to happen. Some of the people in China's government are saying, yes, we're on board. We've got to rein in North Korea. They're wacko bananas, and we've got to tamp them down here, mostly to take away another excuse for the U.S. to intervene in our part of the world. And then we have other people within China who are saying that any actual invasion of North Korea will be seen as a serious potential threat to China itself. So we're not really sure how China is going to react when the shooting actually starts. They're also talking about deploying THAAD right here in Hawaii to protect us from the North Korean missiles. Now, article in Oras.com, What War with North Korea Looks Like, and this article goes into a lot of the same revelations. We had a caller on the show a while back who had served with the U.S. forces stationed in South Korea. And basically on the show he said, North Korea's military is built around a doctrine of defense against invasion. They don't have a great deal of mobility. They don't have a lot of power protection, but they have lots of fortifications, lots of tunnels, lots of deep underground storage, and lots of artillery, some of which was on display this few days ago when they had this huge artillery live fire exercise. And while some of this stuff is old, the U.S. forces in South Korea say they're going to be very effective. In the case of a war fought with tomahawks and so forth, the U.S. has got the advantage. But if the U.S. goes into North Korea on the ground, they will be in trouble. And we did have that analysis that came out the other day saying we're looking at 250,000 Americans dying trying to conquer North Korea. And remember, the last time we tried to conquer North Korea, we did not succeed. So this is an incredibly dangerous situation. Meanwhile, a former Pentagon official told experts at the Senate, this is Ashley Tellis, he's a senior fellow with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, saying that denuclearization is unlikely. Now, at this point, North Korea has not tested an ICBM and has not set off their 6th nuclear test. So they are, in fact, towing the line as drawn by Trump and Haley. But given how it looks like the U.S. is getting ready to invade anyway, I think we can expect some kind of a false flag or manufactured incident to basically say, well, we just have to haul off and invade them. And certainly the sheer volume of propaganda that we're seeing all over the corporate media right now about North Korea is a danger, North Korea is a danger. North Korea is on the other side of the planet. They're going to launch missiles at us. Why would they do it without a really good reason? The result is going to be the annihilation of their country. It's like Assad and the gas attack at Idlib. It doesn't really make sense. Now, interestingly enough, over in Great Britain, they're starting to cool on this idea of going back into Syria. As you know, Parliament passed a bill saying that Great Britain will not take part in Syria, and then we had word coming out from Theresa May and the Minister of Defense that they might just ignore the Parliament bill and go into Syria anyway. But apparently MPs have warned the government's Public Accounts Committee that Britain is actually running out of money for war, and they cannot afford the weapons to go into Syria, or anywhere else for that matter. Remember, all wars are ultimately for, by, and about economics, and the country that runs out of money first is the country that loses. And one of Britain's $1 billion air defense warships had an onboard fire that's put it temporarily out of commission. All right, we'll be right back. And Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about North Korea and this very obvious preparation for an attack and invasion by the United States of America. And you may be wondering why the sudden rush. And that is because South Korea has their elections on May 9th. And the leading candidate, who's well ahead in the polls, has already said that if he wins, he wants the United States to stop being involved in the defense of South Korea. He's a proponent of what's called the Sunshine Principle, which is reunification. And so all of a sudden, if he wins the election, he's going to offer a hand of friendship to Kim Jong-un and say, let us stop all this nonsense. Let's officially end the Korean War from the 1950s, and let's talk about making one country where we can all basically relax. And that would completely change the political dynamic from the U.S. point of view, because they're justifying being over there by saying, well, we have to protect South Korea from North Korea's aggressions, ignoring the fact that it was South Korea and the United States that were the aggressors in that original Korean War. So, that's why they're in a rush, May 9th. And presuming that the United States hasn't gone in and destroyed North Korea before May 9th, that could really change it. But I think that's the reason for the rush. I think that's the reason why it's pedal to the metal. We've got to get into North Korea. You know, heaven help us if a president is elected who's not in favor of more war. Now, I mentioned this in passing. The military in the United States has a bad habit of always preparing for the previous war. And they went into World War II focusing all their efforts on the weapons that had prevailed in World War I. And other countries who were thinking outside the box were able to score significant victories. The story of the aircraft carrier is a good example. The United States entered World War II thinking that the giant ocean-going battleships like the Missouri were the mainstay of naval combat. And aircraft carriers were kind of nice, and we'll have a couple of them, but they weren't really that important. And then, of course, Pearl Harbor was a wake-up call. So was the Battle of Midway. And if you study the Battle of Midway, the U.S. won that one by sheer luck. They caught a couple of breaks, and they were able to inflict heavy damage. So the mainstay force of the U.S. Navy today are the aircraft carrier groups, which prevailed in World War II, but are seen as vulnerable targets in this current era. So we're looking at this article that came out of nationalinterest.org, and it's talking about how, in terms of sheer bulk, the U.S. Navy is the prevailing naval power on Earth. But there are new developments, including stealth submarines. Now, during the Cold War, the United States had a network of sonar sensors all across the floors of the world's oceans. It was called the SOSUS system, and it was backed up by these what are called SIRTAS boats, which are these converted fishing trawlers, but instead of nets, they're just trailing these huge arrays of sensors behind them. But when things started calming down, when the Soviet Union collapsed, SOSUS was basically decommissioned and turned over to environmentalists to watch for whales. But ships have to put off noise to be detected on these sonar systems, and there are ways to prevent that from happening. Now, in the early days of both the Russian and Chinese submarines, they were very noisy. There was a running joke right here in Hawaii that China's ballistic missile submarine, if it was idling at the dock in China, you could put a microphone in the water here and hear it. But these other countries have come to understand how valuable, how important being able to shield ships from leaking noise. And they've got their own variants of the Prairie Masker system, insonified bubble barriers, and they've started going back to diesel-electric submarines, which don't make the noise that nuclear-powered submarines do. We're going to come back from these commercials, a little bit more on this topic, and then we got another phone call. Hello, Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about sort of a generational gap in weapons doctrine between the United States and other countries, where the United States is still focusing most of its development effort on the kinds of ships that prevailed in World War II, meaning the carrier groups. And some of their newer technology ships like the Zumwalt and the Gerald R. Ford are not really performing very well. And they're going up against countries that are being a little bit more out of the box. They're going back to very silent diesel-electric submarines as launch platforms for new generations of sea-skimming missiles like the Zircon, which is supersonic, and it doesn't come straight in. It's whipping back and forth, so the phalanx can't engage with it. And also what are called the supercavitating torpedoes. These are torpedoes that deliberately create a shield of bubbles around themselves, which basically removes the boundary layer. And these things can go hundreds, plural, of miles per hour during the terminal phase of attacking their targets. So it's not a slam dunk. Even with all the money the United States has spent on its military, doesn't necessarily guarantee victory. All right, we're going to take 2 more phone calls, then we're going to close the phone lines again. Kate in Norfolk, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi there, Mike. I know you were talking about the ships and North Korea, and I found this interesting. I've been listening to you, but I've had the local news on mute, and I was reading some of the crawl. And just recently, within the past half an hour, it showed that the Norfolk-based USS Mahan was forced, they had to alter their course because an Iranian vessel acted what they had in, quotes, provocative. Mm-hmm. And it said that a U.S. official said that the Iranian vessel had its weapons manned and came within 1,000 yards of the ship. And I didn't know if you had heard about that or already mentioned that. If this is breaking news, I'm not sure.
Well, it's breaking news, but it happens on a pretty regular basis, and Iran is not being provocative because they're in their own territorial waters. Now, if Iran had warships off the coast of the United States, that would be a provocation. And if you really look at those Iranian patrol boats, they're little more than glorified ski boats. And if there was actually a collision, they would be absolutely pulverized. But again, this is part of the propaganda run-up. Iran is a threat. Iran is a threat. We've got to go give Iran what for. And it precedes every one of these U.S. interventions. They hype how dangerous this other country is, how crazy their rulers are, how they go to bed at night dreaming of annihilating the United States of America. And it's all a giant pile of nonsense.
Huh. All right. Well, thank you for taking my call, Mike, and I will hang up and continue to listen.
All righty, and thank you for the phone call. We are going to switch over to John in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Yeah, I've listened for many years. I agree a lot with what you say. The history thing about the Midway, and the other thing, people ought to check on both these things. And the Philippines. When we just took the Philippines, the Navy... Anyway, the Japanese Navy set up a fake armada up, so our Navy went chasing up, and they wouldn't let the married guys join in on conquering the Japanese Navy, so they left them behind. They were the PT boat guys.
Yes.
And then what happened is the Japanese Navy steamed into the harbor in the Philippines and was going to take, because our Army was there with no backing of the Navy to protect them. Anyway, the PT boat guys just did circles around him and just lobbed
torpedoes.
Torpedoes, yeah, into the gigantic battleships of the Japanese battleships and destroyers, and they couldn't move, and our PT boats kept going around. Okay, that's that story. And then the big
story.
Before
you go any further, I mean, the PT boat is a perfect example of thinking outside the box, where the normal doctrine is you want matching ships going after each other. If this is a battle cruiser, you send a battle cruiser after them. And in this case, it was, we're going to have these little light maneuverable boats that nobody can hit, but can get in close and drop torpedoes on the enemy. And it worked very, very well.
I don't think they had it planned like that, but that's how it worked. And then the other thing about the Midway is incredible, because I actually met some pilots. Anyway. But and it's in these books. I read these books when I was in college anyway. But what happened is one of the aircraft that they sent off, our guys, they found out where the Japanese Navy was. They sent off most of our planes to attack, but the Japanese were waiting up above with their planes and just blew the stuff out of it. And then, but what happened is one of the aircraft carriers, the first plane off the deck, crashed or broke up on the deck, and so they were an hour behind, and so they couldn't launch the other 20 or 30 planes. And so finally they launched, and so the Japanese then thought, okay, that's all of the Americans, attacking. So they landed all their planes to refuel, and then to go and attack our Navy. But then our 20 or 30 planes that were behind, there was no defense of the Japanese because all their planes were landed on the carriers. They just went in and lobbed, and that's where they blew up all the aircraft.
that was the blind luck here. Very early on, when I was getting into computers and programming, one of the things I worked on was a computer war simulation of the Battle of Midway, changing the parameters and everything. The Japanese won overwhelmingly the majority of the simulated engagements. And it really did come down to that luck of the trailing planes. Then there was that goof with the electric arming switch. I mean, it was, of course, obviously the United States scored a big one by being able to break the Japanese codes, except that's a little bit of a misnomer because the U.S. had been reading the Japanese codes from even before Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, it was, so I don't know if God set it up or what, but back then I guess God kind of liked this. I don't know. So anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate your show.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We're going to close the phone lines here for some more news here. And, it's amazing. When every nation that goes to war calls down God to be on their side, and that's got to be very confusing for the deity, I would think. Now then, getting on back to everybody's getting ready for war. Let's be honest, that's what's going on here. And the German arms supplier Rheinmetall is planning to build a factory in Turkey to produce tanks for the Turkish army, even though this building of the factory violates German laws on arms exports. But hey, we don't care about the laws. There's a war on. Once you say you're in war, everything is forgivable and flexible here. Story coming out of Sputnik News, Russia is seeing no attempts by NATO to restore dialogue. Everybody has chosen sides, and they don't want to talk. They don't want to pull back. It's just building and building and building. Russia is expressing serious concern about a U.S. program called Aegis Ashore. And this actually grew out of the land-based simulators built for the Aegis radar missile control system. And there are a bunch of them along the eastern seaboard of the United States that were used in the early development of the CEC, the Coordinated Engagement Capability, because the Aegis ships actually operate as a unit, communicating with each other electronically to provide the battle management system. And so it was decided to take those land-based Aegis systems and modify them into being force projection bases themselves. Now, they obviously don't move. They're sitting on the ground. But Russia is very, very concerned that the Aegis Ashore land-based component in Romania, it has what's called the standard launcher, which can hold either a standard air intercept missile, or it could be also used to launch Tomahawk cruise missiles, which would put a lot of Russia's strategic sites literally in the crosshairs. Now, it was this kind of a ramp-up of weapons on Russia's border that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the U.S. was putting nuclear missiles in Turkey aimed at the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union felt they had to respond by installing nuclear missiles in Cuba. And that led to this confrontation that came within a hair's breadth of a nuclear war. And we're back in that same situation right now, a hair's breadth away from a nuclear war. The difference is that back during the Cuban Missile Crisis, John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev knew that the other did not want a nuclear war. And today, as chaotic and reckless as our government seems to be behaving, and the fact that a lot of people aren't really sure who's actually giving the orders, potential opponents like Russia and China, they don't have that surety that our leadership wants to avoid a nuclear war. And that's going to make them a little quicker on the trigger themselves. And that's why it's just completely out of control. I wish we could bottle common sense and then sprinkle it all over the government. But I don't think there's been any common sense inside the Beltway for decades. It just seems to be getting crazier and crazier. And I think one of the reasons is anybody who's really capable of doing a good job of governance is too smart to really want to get into that mess. And that's why we have these opportunists, money junkies, people like John McCain who think war is great, the bigger the better. Now, Poroshenko is trying to drop hints on Donald Trump for the U.S. to directly strike the Donbass. Yet another war being added to the pile. And because Poroshenko isn't doing very well against the eastern Ukrainian republics, and there's talk of him being replaced for having failed in that agenda of reuniting Ukraine, especially Crimea, and dragging them into the slavery of the European Central Bank. And so now Poroshenko is trying to get the U.S. to go on in and clean up the mess. That could result in a direct military confrontation with Russia. Now, to his credit, Donald Trump has commemorated the Armenians murdered by the Ottomans in World War I. He stopped short of calling it a genocide because that's now a trademarked licensed brand of Israel in World War II. But it's always been a sore spot. And this is not going to make Erdogan any more warm and fuzzy and friendly to the United States government because Turkey wants that Armenian genocide story to just go away. Now, there is still an internecine battle going on within our political structure, and apparently a lot of the, I guess we'll call them hardline Hillary Democrats, are attacking Bernie Sanders and literally telling him to get out of their party. They want him to get lost. He's a huge, huge embarrassment because everybody knows the DNC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz literally rigged the primaries to hand the nomination to Hillary Clinton. All right, we're going to take one call and one call only because he's about to go to work. Mateus in Canada, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to mention that Assad is elected, right? So why are we always calling him a regime? So just for fun, maybe we could start saying Mr. President Assad was bombed by the Trump regime, just for fun to make a point.
I think
I'll let you go. Thanks for taking my call.
All right, you got it. All right, we're going to close the lines again here, and it's a very valid point because all of these interventions the U.S. is doing, they're always going on, it's a tyrant, he's a dictator, he's cruel to his own people, we have to have a humanitarian intervention in which a lot of people are going to get killed, but in the long run it's worth it. But yeah, most of these rulers that the U.S. has taken out of power were democratically elected in verifiable, honest elections. Mohammad Mossadegh, Ardennes, Yanukovych, all of these people. And Assad was duly elected. Down in Chile, the one they kicked out to get Pinochet in was democratically elected. The U.S. actually doesn't seem to like democracy very much unless it can be rigged to elect the people they want, and then it isn't really democracy. It's democracy light or democracy mania, not really democracy, but an incredible simulation. You have to be my age to get the joke on that. So we're talking about the Democratic hardliners want Bernie Sanders to literally get out of the Democratic Party because he's an embarrassment. As long as he's there, everybody in the Democratic Party, the rank and file, all remember how he got cheated during last year's primaries. Well, apparently Cornel West and former Sanders staffer are talking about drafting Bernie Sanders to create a new People's Party. And this would draw a lot of the disaffected Democrats to it. And personally, I'd like to go back to a country that has multiple parties. If for no other reason than it makes it more expensive for the corporations to bribe all the candidates and bypass the will of the American people. I'm seeing more and more articles like this one that follows. This is from PatriotRising.com. The answer to American troubles, delete the central government. And I'm seeing more and more articles like this all over the web. I'm getting the same sentiment in a lot of emails. People understand that Russia isn't the problem, Syria isn't the problem, Iran isn't the problem, North Korea isn't the problem. Even Donald Trump, he himself is not the problem. It is systemic. The federal government is hopelessly, irretrievably, irredeemably corrupted by special interests. And I still think our best possible outcome is a Soviet Union-style collapse of that federal government. That may be the only thing that can save us from a nuclear world war. Now, turning over to the corporate media, things are getting very, very interesting. Boy, Fox News is having so much problems with sexual harassment, hacking into computers, and now there is a growing lawsuit against the Fox News network alleging racial discrimination, and they actually have quite a lot of evidence to support it. And one of their anchors has now signed on to it as well. And they're talking about things where black staffers were automatically denied security passes to the higher floors, and apparently before his departure, Roger Ailes was building walls around his office because he wanted to control who was getting near him. Propaganda is cranking up. Over at Counterpunch, they have an article, Does Rachel Maddow Want Russia Bombed? And they're pointing out how every third item out of her mouth is Russia's doing this and Russia's doing that and Russia's evil and Russia's bad. Well, that's the job of the corporate media. Their job is to sell you these wars. And we need to send a message back to them. We're not buying. If you think these wars are so great, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA torture facilities. Have fun. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And life is not as rosy in the corporate media as it used to be. Even ESPN is feeling the pressure. And apparently they've just announced they're going to lay off about 100 of their employees today, including some of the on-air talent. And I imagine that may be because the bread and circuses aspect of sports as it's handled in the United States is starting to be a little too obvious. I know that certainly in some of these big games, you know, the end-of-season games and everything, this pandering to the military is a big turnoff for a lot of people. Now, I want to talk about this Chobani yogurt lawsuit against Alex Jones. And I think Alex is actually being scapegoated because this all began when Chobani announced they were having a policy of hiring refugees ahead of U.S. citizens. And as we saw in other companies like Starbucks, this resulted in a huge loss of sales. And I think Chobani, rather than acknowledging that they made a poor policy decision, the executives are trying to say it's all Alex Jones' fault. And it's a bit of a reach, and I'm sure that Alex and his lawyers are probably going to be able to defend themselves from this. But I think Alex is being scapegoated by Chobani and their management, who don't want to admit to their own stockholders that they made the decision that actually cut into profits. Because we're seeing that all across the country. Companies, retail operators who forget their business is retail operation and not politics, not indoctrination, they're losing customers. Look at what happened to Target with the transgender bathroom rule. So, now then, the housing bubble is back. We mentioned that yesterday. But there is a big difference between 2007 and today, because today the housing bubble has a lot of company. It has other bubbles to keep it from being lonely, including government bonds, equities, student loans, and so forth. So when the correction hits, it's going to be a lot more serious than we saw back in 2008. Now, a lot of people are talking about the banks. Are they really solid? And as you know, they undergo regular stress tests. And the other day we reported on how Wells Fargo failed 2 bankruptcy stress tests in a row. So I'm looking at this article over in Riv.com saying that Wells Fargo was the worst, but many banks are problematic. And they don't have the resilience to deal with a major downturn. It's all fairy tale money anyway. And you cannot build a long-lasting economy totally on debt, because private central banking is inherently unstable. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And I'm looking at this very alarming story that has just now come on out. Apparently, at this White House meeting with the entire Senate, President Trump himself was only there to make opening remarks. Then he left, and the briefing was given to the Senate by the National Security Team, the neocons. And I think this is a very strong indicator that, in point of fact, Donald Trump has been brought to heel, that he's not really running the show. And as I said, one of the rumors that I heard floating around when he began to reverse course on so many of his policies regarding wars was that he was told point blank, the war agenda is moving forward. All you can decide is if you will continue to be the president or we find some way to be rid of you. But for all the attention that was focused on this meeting with the senators, and then for Trump to only be there for 5 minutes to deliver opening remarks and then leaving, it's not his show. The coming war in North Korea is not his show. Now, do you remember back during the mortgage-backed security meltdown, one of the problems was that Wall Street's pet rating agencies had declared these mortgage bundles AAA, which is why so many pension funds were legally allowed to invest in them, and why so many pension funds were destroyed in the subsequent collapse. And apparently the rating agencies haven't really learned much from their past mistakes, because apparently Moody's is claiming the American retail industry is stable, ignoring the thousands of stores that have closed last year and the more than 8,000 closures planned for this year. But in Moody's, it's stable. You can go ahead and invest in it. Now, one of the biggest iconic brands in the world has to start cutting jobs, and we're talking about Coca-Cola. And they're getting ready to cut 1,200 jobs. They're having to cut costs because their sales are down. And like so many other companies, they're looking for a scapegoat to blame, rather than say our customers just don't have any money to buy this kind of stuff anymore. And so Coca-Cola is wagging their finger at that growing segment of the population that is concerned about healthy food and sugar and all that other stuff. This problematic health trend, it's cutting into the profits. We've got to find some way to undo it. And if you will remember, earlier in the week, we were talking about these news articles coming on out saying that people who were into healthy eating, it was a cult. That people who wanted to avoid processed food, that they were actually endangering their lives and health by eating these vegetables and farm fresh eggs and dairy products and stuff. No. The way to health is to just go on out and get that prepackaged goop that's in your supermarket shelves. It's all about protecting profitability. And yes, awareness of health issues may be part of it, but I really do think that we are seeing the effects of a population that has been impoverished by the money junkies and by the wartime economy, which is what we have been in for years now. And people don't have money to buy Coca-Cola all the time. More gold is pouring into China. In fact, they imported more than twice as much in March as had been the case in February. So Russia and China are stocking up on gold. They're going to be backing their BRICS trade currency with gold, and that, of course, is a big, big threat to the money junkies who believe in fractional reserve banking and money created out of thin air. Because when the economy starts to really shake, people are going to want a reliable store of value. And that piece of ink and paper, that's all it's worth, a piece of paper with ink on it. Meanwhile, there's a very interesting article over in the Daily Coin talking about silver. Now, everybody's always gold this and gold that. And yes, gold is kind of nice. But silver has actually been outperforming gold. And there's much more of it, which is probably why it was the monetary base for the U.S. dollar up until the creation of the Federal Reserve. And so this article is talking about silver being the money of the people. When fiat currencies fail, silver is going to be the way to go. And it's always been the recommendation of this program to our listeners and our readers that you should have some physical metal under your own control. Do not buy those paper contracts. They are way over leveraged. And when the panic hits, only the first people in will get their money out. And everybody else is going to be left holding a very impressive looking piece of paper. And that's going to be it. So you definitely want silver and gold. And a good way to get into silver without paying numismatic value, which is driven by fashion, is what's so-called junk silver, which are pre-1964 coins in the U.S., which actually contain silver. And you can buy them by the pound, literally, places like eBay. And the advantage to that is, if the dollar does collapse, those coins are known units of value. People recognize them. And so when you go down to fill up your gas tank on the car, instead of charging you $4.50 per gallon in the inflated Federal Reserve notes, they're going to charge you 25 cents a gallon in the real silver, which is what gas prices used to be. But it's a known, recognized unit of monetary value, which is going to come really in handy as a medium of exchange when people lose faith, trust, and belief in paper with ink all over. Now remember, when the United States first started, the paper notes were not the money. They were claim checks. The money was the silver content and gold content of the coinage. And those paper notes were claim checks. It said right on the front, you can redeem this note, this claim check, for lawful money at the bank. And that meant you would take that paper silver certificate, $1, and you'd take it on down, and you would get 4 silver quarters for it. If you look at a modern Federal Reserve note, that's not there anymore. The Federal Reserve note is the money. And it's all make-believe. It's a fairy tale. Now, Fannie Mae is introducing innovative solutions to allow student debt-laden millennials to buy a home. Yes, even though you're struggling to pay your student loans, we have a new way for you to get a mortgage. In other words, they're bringing back the subprime mortgages. They didn't learn anything from 2008 because the people who did that didn't have to pay for it. You did. With TARP, bailouts, and QE. Because under fascism, the poor are always made to pay for the mistakes and greed of the rich. Now, here is a very alarming story, and it tells you just how strained everything has become all over the West. Over in Great Britain, they have school lunch programs. If you're below a certain level of income, you actually get free school meals during the school year. The problem is, on vacation, these kids are having to go hungry because their families can't afford to buy food. Food prices are going up, and these kids are basically getting by eating potato chips and drinking energy drinks, and that's it. And that's hardly a nutritious meal. Now, another article from Investment Watch blog. The election economic surge has faded. Everybody thought Donald Trump was really going to fix things. Now, he has come out with his new tax plan, And it's tax cuts for businesses and corporations. He did take out some of the loopholes the ultra-rich can use, which is a good thing. But it's not really going to help get more money into the hands of ordinary Americans so that they can spend it back into the economy. And so the enthusiasm, the Trump bump has faded. And the numbers are all looking, they're in dangerous territory. Red flags everywhere, all these bubbles. The IMF is now out there saying Greece needs to sacrifice more than they already have. Those bankers at the European Central Bank and the IMF and the World Bank, they're having to go to bed with only another couple of $1 million, and they're suffering so hard in their homes and their palaces. Let's see. After almost a year, the Caterpillar company has finally had a week that hit 1% sales, and it's mostly China. China's buying a lot of Caterpillar equipment. They're doing a lot of building over there. But the economy is clearly declining. Actually, it's more or less been in a continuous decline since 2008. And all this talk of recovery in the sky-high stock market is basically a smokescreen. Because we know the stock market is being artificially run up so it can be used as a political banner. And that was started by President Bill Clinton, and every president since then has been forced to go along with that. Because they really don't have all that much else that they can wag at you to make you think everything is okay. We know they're fudging the inflation numbers. We know they're fudging the unemployment numbers. We could be very, very, very close to the edge. And again, that's another reason why they're rushing to get into a world war, because they think a world war will fix the economy, because, hey, it worked the last 2 times. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, World War III. Except it didn't really make things better. It certainly resulted in full employment because huge numbers of our people were over in other countries killing people and being killed in return. And there was a buildup of industry for the war machine, but in the long run, we incurred a lot more debt. Because the bankers, they love the wars. War is the bankers' richest harvest of debt. And they don't care which side wins or loses, because they loan money to both sides to fight the war, and when the war is over, they loan them more money to rebuild after the war, and when it's all over, when this giant scam is all over, ordinary people like you and I, we have more or less what we had before, except the graveyards are a lot bigger, and we're back on the hook as debt slaves to the central bankers for another 100 years. Now, Trump has apparently backed off on his pledge to end Obamacare. They're still debating it, modifying it. Apparently, the plans being put forward are basically Obamacare light. There are cosmetic changes and not much else. It's still a giveaway to the health insurance industries. But the system is starting to break down. West Virginia has ended their state-run Obamacare exchange. Last Friday, Governor Jim Justice signed a bill to shut down the state-run Obamacare health insurance exchange. And basically, they're going to be withdrawing from the national health care program because it did not make health care affordable. It actually made it more expensive. A lot of people are finding that it's actually cheaper to pay cash for their medical needs. And there is a whole new crop of medical care facilities, doctors and clinics that are operating on a cash-only basis without insurance. And that means they can offer lower prices. See, the way it works, if you are a doctor or a hospital and you are accepting insurance from a particular company, that company will come on in and say, you have to give us a discount on the services that you offer in order to sign the contract. But because you accept our insurance, that will bring more customers through the door. And in order to maintain profitability, these hospitals and doctors will raise their prices for the care and services. That's one of the reasons why the costs of medical care have gone through the roof and are the highest in the world. because if they're accepting the insurance, they're not actually getting that much money. So if you don't have insurance or you haven't met your deductible, that's why you're having to pay so much. So there's this whole new cadre, if you will, of doctors and clinics who are cash only, no insurance, and they're able to operate at much lower prices. Obviously, the health insurance company doesn't want you to know about them, which is why this is not getting a lot of coverage in corporate media. But it is a growing trend. It is a growing trend. Article coming out of Investment Watch blog, is the Trump tax plan a sign of better days to come? Well, they're focused on this idea of corporate tax rates being cut from 39.6%, which is arguably high in the world market, down to 15%. The question is, what are these businesses going to do with the extra cash? Are they going to hire more people? Are they going to offshore? Are they going to just put it in their pockets as bonuses? We're in an age where the poor are getting poorer and the rich are buying robots. And that doesn't seem to me to be a harbinger of better times for all Americans. Now, Craig Hemke is out there saying that the Trump feel-good financial narrative is crumbling. That right now our markets are being held together with electronic baling wire and digital chewing gum. Much of what you think you know about what's going on with the economy is an illusion. 5% unemployment. No, there isn't. We've got over 90 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. Meanwhile, of course, the refugees are getting free handouts. The military spending is increasing. Speaking of refugees, apparently up at the European Union, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, basically uncorked on the Eurocrats and the members of the European Parliament in this verbal assault over the EU's meddling in his country's internal affairs. And he basically tore into Brussels and basically said, we are really irritated by the verbal straitjacket which stops us from calling a spade, and this kind of talk has become very common in European public life recently. And what he's talking about there is how the EU is trying to impose restrictions on language on various issues, first and foremost, the refugee problem. There is a problem. The EU's solution is not to let anybody talk about it. But it is there. Story out of Sputnik News. The latest German crime figures show surge in violent crime by migrants. And apparently an increase in murder, manslaughter, 12% increase in rape and sexual assault. But you're not allowed to talk about it. That's how they're going to fix everything. You can't talk about the problem. You know, that was the way the old Soviet Union used to operate. When bad things were happening, wasn't mentioned in the press. We don't talk about it. That ultimately led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. It was a contributing factor because of Chernobyl. Because while Europe was seeing their radiation meters spike, and everybody knew something had gone horribly wrong somewhere inside Russia, the Soviet government was saying, no, we're all fine. Everything's fine here, and nothing was reported to the Russian people. And when they found out that, yes, there had been a disaster at Chernobyl, people had been exposed to radiation, and the government was covering it up, that was one of the nails in the coffin of the Soviet Union. Because you can only lie to your people so long before it catches up with you. And that's a lot of what's going on here in the United States as well. Now, getting on back to this, you will not say certain things. Apparently, Mayor Robert Menard, he's mayor of a French city, he's been found guilty of a thought crime for saying schools with 91% Muslim students have become a problem. And apparently the fact that they are a problem is irrelevant. You're just not allowed to talk about it. And that seems like a bit of tyranny and dictatorship there as well. Now, Austrian and German officials admit they are going to have to keep their border controls. They say we must know who's coming here, and they're extending their border controls indefinitely. The open borders, Schengen, is now whittling away. The EU experiment has failed. Of course, the real goal of the EU was to build a component for the eventual New World Order, but it's falling apart. They don't know what to do about it. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're going to go take a phone call here. Ramsey in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, sir.
Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, you see, sir, I just want to ask you something. Yesterday, you talked about an issue that reminded me of what I researched about almost 20 years ago when I was in high school. You were talking about World War I.
Yes.
And sir, you said, now see, sir, according to my research, and also, like, I went to university after that, and I got a degree in history and everything, so I take history really seriously. So, see, sir, according to my research, Woodrow Wilson won the election in 1916 because he said he's not going to intervene in World War I, and then he intervened in 1917 because of the Germans attacked the ship and sunk, and also because of the Zimmerman telegram.
You're absolutely right. Woodrow Wilson campaigned on keeping the United States out of the Europe War, and then the Lusitania was set up to be a bloody shirt. The fact is that the United States, despite being officially neutral in the European war, was smuggling weapons to Great Britain. And the Germans knew that they were doing that. In fact, the German government actually took out ads in the New York newspapers warning people not to sail on the Lusitania because since she was carrying weapons to Great Britain, it was a legitimate target of war. And the Lusitania was sent into an area where they knew there were all kinds of German U-boats. She did not have any escorts, and she was set up to be sunk, and then they used that to anger the American people into saying, well, we wanted to stay out of Europe, but obviously we have to go on in there and give those Germans what for, which is kind of weird because World War I actually began between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, but it swung over to Germany because Germany was an economic threat to Great Britain and the United States.
So, sir, what I was told, so like the research that I did was correct then?
Yeah, I just filled in a couple of blank spots.
Okay, because so like from what I understood is that like maybe I've heard it from somebody on RBN, I don't remember, like maybe I'm confusing you with another host, that the ship was sunk by Americans themselves, so they could use that to attack Germany.
No, that's you didn't hear that from me.
Okay, I must have heard it from another host then. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over to Fred in Iowa. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine.
You know that lady had called in the first hour about calling the government comment lines anyhow, 202-456-1111.
Yes.
Well, I come up with an idea and a solution, and I'd like to give it, and 2 reasons why it probably won't work after that. If we could get 1 million callers, I don't know if 100,000 callers would work. It's called the President, the Dog Catcher, mainly our senators and congressmen, state and U.S., and tell them to stop the wars. Stop invading countries that do nothing to us. But here is the problem. People probably wouldn't do that. But if we could get it started.
Hello, you fading out on me.
Here, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I hear you now, but for a while you were sort of fading off into the twilight zone. Yeah. You know, at this point, the fact is that for whatever reason, corruption, blackmail, coercion, going with the flow, groupthink, whatever, it is very obvious that our politicians simply aren't listening to the American people. And that's because they get their money from large corporate donors and they get their votes from election fraud, so they don't feel they have to listen to us anymore.
Right. Well, that's correct. I'm not arguing that point. You're right on.
All right. Well, Fred, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to do another commercial break, and we'll be right back. We're going to close the phone.
Hold me over.
All right, I'll hold you over, but you're going to be the last call for the day. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Fred, you had one more comment you wanted to make. Fred, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine. What is on your... you had one more thing you wanted to say.
Yeah, I'll try to talk fast. I'm not good at that. Anyhow, our economy is a war-based economy. The military-industrial complex, if I have my figures right, is more valuable than the 50 top corporations in America, or the 50 countries, GPD, anyhow, gross domestic product. So that would be a problem. But we could start bringing the troops home by degree. And I know I can't talk very much and explain this, and it pisses me off that I have to talk in sound bites. Okay, thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
All right, Fred, thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and we're closing the phone lines for the rest of the show because I'm way, way behind on the talking points. Getting on back to the war, I'm very distressed to see they're already ramping up the propaganda on Iran. Even though the White House has said that Iran is in compliance with the P5+1, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which is the group that wants to get Iran's government replaced with themselves, is out there insisting Iran has cheated and that they're weaponizing nuclear weapons even as we speak. So they're ramping up weapons of mass destruction again. Lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. How many more times are you going to have to be lied to until you're ready to stand up and scream at these people, you are full of it, and I am not listening to you anymore? Don't just think it, say it. Put some force, drama behind it, if you will. Okay, now, article coming out of another one from Investment Watch blog. Basically, as you know, the Democrats were threatening to force a government shutdown if money for a border wall was included in the bill to fund the government. And we're talking about a microscopic amount out of the total budget. But the liberal Democrats and the globalists, they don't want any walls. They want everybody moving everywhere else to erase the memories of nations and regions and history and culture. Just turn it into one pureed blop of humanity that doesn't have any idea who they are so that they're easier to control. And sure enough, it looks like Donald Trump has backed down and will sign the emergency spending bill without the money for the wall. And I remember yesterday we got a phone call from somebody who was responding to my criticisms of the president by saying, well, you know, some things are more important to other people. The immigration wall was the most important thing to me, and he's doing a great job on that. Wrong. What's really angering a lot of people is Speaker Paul Ryan wants to fund Planned Parenthood in this emergency spending bill, but not the Trump border wall. Now, Ted Cruz has another idea. He wants to basically take $14 billion in seized drug lord assets and spend that on the wall. That sounds like a good idea. And apparently the fact that Trump has caved on the border wall, Rush Limbaugh was very upset about that, and I can understand why. Now, amazingly enough, corporate media is finally acknowledging the long history of CIA involvement in drug trafficking. And apparently the History Channel, and the same people that had America's Book of Secrets that I was on a few years back, is doing this series, America's War of Drugs. Not on drugs, of drugs. And it goes through the last 5 decades, showing how the CIA has been involved in drug running, drug dealing, and allows the drug trade in this country for political alliances and also because it's a big moneymaker. And remember, that whole Bush-Clinton cartel goes all the way back to that CIA operation out of Arkansas in the mid-1980s. Manufactured guns without serial numbers down to the Nicaraguan Contras, and it was all funded by cocaine pouring back into the United States over the same smuggler pipeline, and everybody got very, very rich, and a lot of our children got hurt by that cocaine, and anybody who stood in their way got their lives destroyed. Now, apparently up in Berkeley, things are really getting crazy. I remember Berkeley in the 60s, where the idea of freedom of speech, that we have a right to criticize the war in Vietnam, that was the mainstay of political discourse. And now it's all political correctness, and we don't want to hear this, and we don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear Ann Coulter. Okay, stay home. Nobody is forcing them to go in and listen to Ann Coulter, but as of the last word, Coulter has canceled her trip to Berkeley because of all the violence that's going on. And my question is, a lot of those students up at Berkeley are descending into student loan debt. What kind of jobs are they going to get when all they seem to be learning how to do is yell, scream, fight each other, and scream political correctness? There's not a big career future in that sort of thing. Or liberal arts as a whole. How many art history majors are you going to find actually getting jobs with that degree? Poor United Airlines, they cannot get a break. And I'm sure the only reason this story made the headlines is because United Airlines has had this horrible, horrible string of luck. And apparently there was a world record giant rabbit was being transported in the cargo hold of a Boeing 767 from London to O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, and the bunny arrived dead. And apparently this was an attempt to deliver this giant rabbit to a purchaser. Obviously that deal has now gone off, and United Airlines is saying, well, we regret it. We do try and take care of the animals that are shipped in the cargo hold. And we don't know what happened. Maybe the rabbit just got terrified of all the noise. Maybe the cargo hold wasn't as well pressurized. Maybe it wasn't warm enough. We don't know. Animals do die in those cargo holds. And that is a reality. The original Chihuahua for one of the snack food things, the original one actually died that way, and they had to get a look-alike dog for the subsequent commercials here. I almost have to wonder who's been shorting United Airlines stock, because United does seem to have been hit with a lot of negative publicity, and it is adversely affecting their stock price. All right, there has been another incident where SWAT has hit the wrong address. They broke into the wrong home, wrong address. There was a prayer group. They thought they were going to find gun thieves. They detained a 14-year-old girl in the bathroom. And the Carroll County Sheriff's Office in Gaithersburg is admitting they got it all wrong when they burst into this home. And apparently the homeowner, had the same name as the man police were searching for in a gun theft case. But incredibly, Carroll County got a warrant to search the wrong address. And they broke up a prayer meeting. Ridiculous. And, adding fuel to the fire, this is being reported from the Free Thought Project. Apparently there was an altercation where police beat up an 83-year-old man. And as is usual, there are two different stories. Now, the man in question, Larry Sevinsky, owns a bar in this town. And it was St. Patrick's Day, and everybody was, having a good time. And somebody came on and said, the police are out there just looking to see if they can spot drunk drivers leaving so they can write tickets and make money. So he goes out to talk to them, and there's an altercation, and they wind up beating him up. Now, the police are claiming he came at them with threats and anger and everything, and he's saying no, that it was just, he was just trying to ask them what they were doing here. He wound up with a shattered elbow and a bloody nose. And everybody said, all right, well, let's look at the dash cam footage of what happened. But it was mysteriously deleted due to a technical failure. And that is also something that seems to be epidemic. When the dash cams don't support the police officer's version of the truth, there's a technical error. There's a technical error. Now, down under in Queensland, along the Gold Coast, they have, unfortunately, a very high crime rate. the crime statistics are not very good, and it's actually affecting tourism to the area. And so the Gold Coast police have hit on a way to make the crime statistics look a lot better. And that is they're literally going out to victims of crime and asking them to retract their complaints, so they will not be in the system and counted for the overall crime record. This is a growing trend. Yeah, there's a problem. We can't fix the problem, but we're going to make it look better. We're going to paper it over. Yeah, there's high crime along the Gold Coast, but if we tell people not to report it, it'll look better for the tourists. Yeah, the refugees are causing all kinds of problems over Europe, and we can't do a thing about all the rapes and robberies and murders and everything, but we can forbid people from talking about it. Or in Germany, they can literally order the newspapers to not report when refugees are the perpetrators in crime. Yeah, we got a problem with the Fukushima meltdown, but we'll just tell everybody it's okay. It's only a steam explosion. Up in the Northland, Minnesota, they're still having school closings, cancel classes today because of snow and freezing rain in the region. And despite this, Al Gore's people are out there demanding trillions of dollars to fight human-caused global warming. Now, one of the main proponents for human-caused global warming and for fluidity of gender and various other things was Bill Nye. He was the son of Louis Nye, the comedian, and he likes to call himself Bill Nye, the science guy. But a lot of people have criticized his shows as not being very scientific at all. And apparently his show on Netflix has now been dropped. So Bill has been sent to the woodshed, as Ryan Dawson likes to say. All right, let's talk about computers here. Apparently Google is launching yet another attack on fake news and problematic content. See, they're not even calling it fake news anymore. It's problematic content. Content that somebody who's rich and powerful doesn't want to get on out there. They're calling it Project Owl, and it's a three-pronged attack. And one of the prongs is apparently Google is, again, rewriting their algorithm to bury what they declare to be fake news in search results. Basically, what they're trying to do is bias it toward the official corporate stories get served up first, and then if you go down a few pages, you might see some alternative independent voices. But Google has become a gatekeeper. They, not you, will decide what you're going to see, hear, and read. In fact, Google is beginning to remind me of this TV series back in the 50s, The Outer Limits. Had the theremin and the oscilloscope as an opening title here. And there was the control voice. We will control all you see and hear. Sounds like Google to me. Now, AT&T has been caught launching a fake 5G network in a desperate attempt to seem innovative. They're calling it the 5G evolution, and it's been exposed. It's not actually a new 5G network. It's just a rebranded 4G offering to try and lure customers. And, you know, they did that before. I remember here in Hawaii when 4G was first coming out on the smartphones, and AT&T started advertising they had a 4G system. And, yes, your 4G system would link with it, but it was operating at 3G speeds. We live in an age where everything's a scam, everything's a lie, everything's a fake. Now, hackers have uncorked an experimental malware targeting Linux. It's called the Linux Shishiga malware, and it's basically going after Linux-based systems, which is a niche market. And most Linux-based systems are not being used for things like business or accounting, but apparently somebody feels they need to have a way to get in there. And basically ESET, which is the security company that found them, said that basically you should never use default Telnet and Secure Shell credentials, because this malware apparently has a password list that it uses to try a brute force attack. And the only way to be immune is to not have one of those default passwords. And that is something you should all be aware of, even on your router. When you get a router home from the store and you set it up, there's that little URL you can go to for the control panel. And there's a password. And a lot of people just use the password that's supplied with it. And it's a default password, and you can even find out what it is going online. What is the default password for the blah, 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 blah router, and you will find pages that have it. And hackers can reach your router from the outside, and if they have that password, they can get on in. So if you have a router and you have not changed that router password, that is your homework for the night. You need to do that. Because it's open season on computer users by the cyber criminals, by the government, by everybody. And yes, apparently some of that leaked NSA spyware is already being detected in the hands of cyber criminals. Now, Julian Assange has come on out with a verbal assault in response to the CIA's talk about having him arrested and he's a danger. And he's basically saying the CIA is waging war on truth-tellers. And yes, that's true. People who live by the lie cannot stand anybody who tells the truth. They absolutely hate it. They don't know what to do with it, other than to silence it. Burn the heretics. And basically Assange is saying that the Trump administration's vow to crack down on WikiLeaks is because officials are embarrassed that their own failings are being exposed for the public to see. And their failings ought to be exposed for the public to see. When they violate the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the American people ought to know. Now, the Federal Communications Commissioner, Ajit Pai, has revealed he's going to roll back the net neutrality rules put in place by Obama back in 2015. And basically, this is going to lead to an Internet with a fast lane for people with the money to pay, and it will allow ISPs to change the priority of various websites. And I can imagine that's going to make it even more difficult for people to get to whatreallyhappened.com or Republic Broadcasting. And this is so contrary to the principles established for other means of communication like radio and TV and telephone. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. Somebody went on out and did a survey, and this is over in Japan, where the government is now trying to get all the people who evacuated from the area around that Fukushima disaster to basically go back home, farm the land, do jobs, pay taxes, act as if everything is okay. And they're really out there saying that conditions in the prefecture are good. Yeah, they're good. That's our official word. It's good now. And to nobody's surprise, 80% of the Fukushima evacuees do not want to go back there. Not going to be able to fool them on that one. Now, as you know, there's a lot of secrecy about nuclear tests. And apparently France carried out their first nuclear test in North Africa. And the French daily La Parisienne found a recently declassified military map that showed the fallout from the detonation of France's first nuclear bomb spread well beyond what was admitted to at the time. Apparently Algeria, the whole Saharan region was contaminated, reached the island of Sicily and the southern Spanish coast. One of the worst accidents in the U.S. testing involved a bomb that was much larger than expected, and it contaminated a Japanese fishing boat. And the U.S. government did not tell the government of Japan this is what had happened to the fishing boat. And the fishing boat went back to Japan, and the crew was very sick, and they didn't know what was wrong with them, but the fish were sold into the markets, and thousands of Japanese people got radiation sickness. That is the measure of the callousness and disregard for ordinary people that you see in government. Interesting little story here. Apparently, scientists studying the DNA, a company called DNA Consultants, did DNA testing of the Cherokee Indians living on the Koala Reservation in western North Carolina and find that they're actually from the Middle East. And it may be that they are descendants of captured Turks who were, not Turks. Somebody actually sent in an explanation. saying that during the early exploration of the New World, that some freed Middle Eastern prisoners were actually abandoned on the coastline. There had actually been some talk many years ago where the Cherokee language appears to be derived from Hebrew, and it was laughed at the time, but now it looks like maybe. We don't know as much about history as we think we do. We know in the present day, most of what we think is history is a fiction. It's made up to make some politician look good or some conquered enemy look bad. But we really don't know until we go out and find for ourselves. Apparently, there was an embarrassment. 2 professors from Westchester University did an in-depth analysis into people's ancestries, and one of their participants, Bernard, was very unhappy when the test revealed he wasn't black, he was mainly European. But he thought he was a black guy. So all that discrimination for nothing. All right, there is the music. It is time for me to get out of here. I got things I got to get done this afternoon. We'll be back here tomorrow, Thursday, on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please share what you learn here with everybody that you know. We're literally fighting a war here, and in the nuclear age, the enemy is war itself. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.